So what is homelessness? Well, that depends on who you ask and which reference you use. Even our federal, state, and local government agencies that serve folks who are actually experiencing homelessness have a difficult time finding the same definition. Imagine that. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, homeless is an adjective, meaning having no home or permanent residence. But let me ask you, what do you envision when I say the word homelessness? Is it someone that's living on the street? Are they black? Are they white? Are they young? Are they old? Is it a man or is it a woman? I'm going to give you a pop quiz. I'm going to give you 4 scenarios. And I want you to tell me, who do you think is experiencing homelessness or is on the verge of homelessness? So let's start at the top. Meet Jessica. Jessica is a 21-year-old college student at a local university and majoring in chemical engineering. Moving clockwise, we have Sam, who is a 9-year-old who lives with both his mom and his dad and 2 siblings. At the bottom, we have Mia, who is with a nonprofit agency. And then we have William. William is a 67-year-old who just retired after working 30 years as a manager for a retail store. So, who do you think is experiencing homelessness or is on the verge of homelessness out of these 4? Well, confession number 1, all of them. Let me share their stories. Jessica, who is the college student, a lot of universities assume that upper-class students are going to live off campus. They don't expect to provide housing for every single student. Since Jessica does not have reliable transportation, she tries to live as close to the university as possible. A lot of landlords know that college students have this same scenario. So it's not just Jessica, there's a lot of students who experience this. And as a result, landlords tend to charge a higher rate for the rent. Because they also assume that, well, Jessica can just ask her parents for the money. I know a lot of you are parents that are like, no, they can't. Or they assume that Jessica can just go get another loan while they're in school. Just rack up the debt. Well, that's not the case for Jessica. She works full-time, but is also working a full-time job to cover her expenses. And because this semester, Jessica had to take a few more courses that were a little bit more difficult, she had to reduce some of the hours that she was working at her job, which means she fell a little bit behind in her rent. Let's talk about Sam. Ideally, most folks think that it's great to live with 2 parents. But that's not the case when your mother is the victim of domestic violence. When your mother has to endure physical and mental abuse, it's not easy. And as much as Sam's mom would like to leave, one of the ways that Sam's father has control of the mother is by telling her, you can't go get a job. So there's a financial dependency, so it's not so easy for her to leave that situation. In the case of Mia, Mia works full-time in a nice job, nice salary, and has been living in her apartment for 2 years. Until one day when her landlord put a notice on her door and said, we're turning your apartment into a condo. So you have 2 choices. You can either purchase an apartment for $170,000, or you can move and rent someplace else. Well, since Mia had been living in her apartment for more than 2 years, the market rate for rent has increased. So she learned that her rent would actually increase by about $300 per month. And she's really not in a position to purchase at this time. William happens to live in the same neighborhood as Mia where this development is occurring. Now, William owns his own home, but he's on a fixed income. And what happens when development comes into a neighborhood, a lot of times the property tax also increases. So this is going to make it difficult for William to be able to remain in his home. So let's go back. I'm going to talk about some of the myths. Homelessness is an adjective. And so often, we tend to use this word to describe the person rather than the situation. So we will say, I met a homeless person today, rather than using person-first language and saying, I met someone who is experiencing homelessness today. When you use person-first language, it puts a face to the actual person. They are not defined by their circumstances. And another thing, we hope that what they are going through is temporary. Myth number 2 is that a lot of times folks think that someone who is experiencing homelessness is living on the street. That is one of the cases, but there's actually a total of 6 ways that someone can experience homelessness. So living on the street is one. Someone could live in their car. Someone could be living in a shelter. Remember, the definition is having no home or permanent residence. So all of these situations are temporary. As in the case with Sam's mom, one way that she's going to try to get out of her situation is by going and living with her parents. This is called doubling up, when you have 2 families who are living in a place that is designed for only one family. Folks can also couch surf. So tonight you might be staying with a friend, tomorrow you may be staying with your sister, maybe 1 or 2 nights, and the next night you're not sure where you're staying. That's considered couch surfing, when you're sleeping on the couch. A lot of folks don't realize you can actually be homeless without a home, or within a home. So you can actually be in a home but still be homeless. This is common amongst our youth who are experiencing homelessness. So what happens is when you have a gap, a generation gap between the older siblings and the younger siblings, a lot of times parents can't afford a residence where everyone gets a bedroom. So the bedrooms are given to the younger siblings, and the older ones have to live on the couch or sleep on the floor. They also are required to fend for themselves. So they're responsible for their own food. They're responsible to get up and get themselves to school. They're responsible to do their own laundry. This is considered homeless within a home. Another myth is that most folks assume that the average person who is experiencing homelessness is an elderly black man, that is the face of homelessness. Well, 49% of people who are experiencing homelessness are black, but 39% of folks who are experiencing homelessness are actually children. So Sam is actually the face of homelessness. The average age is a 9-year-old child. The largest growing segment of folks who are experiencing homelessness are families. So again, Sam becomes the poster child for homelessness. So this year, more women and more children are going to experience homelessness. A lot of people assume that homelessness comes from a mental illness or because they are a drug user or an alcoholic. Only 16% of folks who suffer from a mental illness are experiencing homelessness, and 26% of folks who are drug users or alcoholics are experiencing homelessness. Mental illness and chronic drug use or alcoholism are actually symptoms, not causes of homelessness. So folks who are experiencing homelessness actually try to cope. And if you think you can't slide into a mental health issue, sometimes genetically, some folks are prone to what's called schizophrenia. And when you're in a situation, all of a sudden, it's triggered and that comes forward. Another myth is that it's the individual's fault. They've done something wrong to cause them to be experiencing homelessness. They're lazy. They don't want to get a job. They can just get a job. Well, it's important to remember that there are two main causes of homelessness, and one is a lack of affordable housing, and the two is a lack of a livable wage. Did you know that the average person who's working a minimum wage job has to work at least 70 hours in order to afford a one-bedroom apartment at market rate? Where's the quality of life? Where's the dignity in that? So how do we find a cure? Well, you can't put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. So a lot of times we think that, well, I'll just donate a coat or a hat and mittens, and that'll keep that person warm, even though they're experiencing homelessness. But as we learned just a couple of months ago, that's not enough. It is possible to die while sitting at a bus stop and freeze to death when you're experiencing homelessness. What we need is more affordable housing and livable wages. So many of you are probably asking yourself, well, what can you do to address this issue? Well, congratulations, you've done two of the most important steps today. You came here to get educated. So I hope now I have dispelled some of the myths that you may have had about homelessness. And number two, it's important to hear somebody's story. So confession number two, Mia is actually me. I received a notice on my door saying that your apartment's getting turned into a condo. Now, I will find housing. And I hope today that this is just the beginning of you actually talking to folks who are experiencing homelessness, ask them to share their story. Look them in the eye. They are human beings. And please continue to educate yourself, whether that's from asking questions or plugging into agencies that actually support and serve folks who are experiencing homelessness. So thank you for coming today.